My name is Olivia Carter. And 4 months after my mother-in-law took my baby, the nurse looked at me and whispered, "She doesn't know who signed the adoption papers, does she?" That's when I finally smiled. But that's the ending. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the day I realized the family I married into was planning to erase me from my own child's life. People think betrayal feels like a knife. Doesn't. It feels like drowning, the kind where you can see the surface but can't reach it, where your lungs burn and your vision blurs, but no one notices you're disappearing. The day Eleanor Carter told her son I wasn't mother material. I was 8 months pregnant, folding tiny onesies in the nursery we'd painted sage green. Her voice drifted up through the heating vent, clear, crisp, and venomous. "Nathan, darling, I'm only thinking of the baby. It is too career-focused. Children need stability, tradition. Carter children especially." I remember the silence more than Nathan's response, the hollow pause where my husband should have defended me. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, placating. "Mom, Olivia's going to be a great mother." "Of course she'll try," Eleanor said with that velvet condescension I'd grown to recognize. "But some women simply aren't built for it. Your father and I have discussed options. Just in case." That's when I realized they weren't just planning my failure. They were counting on it. Before the Carter name became a weight around my neck, before the whispers and the schemes, I was Olivia Reeves, marketing executive at Meridian Group, the kind of woman Atlanta business magazines featured in their 30 under 30 lists. I lived in a converted loft in Inman Park, collected vintage advertising prints, and never imagined myself as part of Atlanta's old money circles. Then I met Nathan Carter at a charity gala I was coordinating. He was quiet, thoughtful, with kind eyes and a self-deprecating humor that made him seem separate from his family's suffocating legacy. "You're nothing like I expected," he told me on our third date, walking through Piedmont Park as autumn leaves crunched beneath our feet. "What did you expect?" I asked. "Someone impressed by my last name." He smiled. "You didn't even Google me." We married 14 months later in a ceremony that was a compromise between my simplicity and the Carters' expectations. Eleanor wore a smile as tight as her pearl choker, kissing my cheek with lips that never touched my skin. "Welcome to the family, dear," she said, her eyes evaluating me like a purchase she hadn't authorized. For 2 years, I navigated the Carter world carefully. Charity boards, country club memberships, Sunday dinners where Eleanor subtly corrected everything from my table settings to my political opinions. I kept my career, despite Eleanor's hints that Carter wives traditionally focus on family matters. Nathan straddled the line between us, never quite standing up to his mother, but reassuring me privately that he loved my independence. "Mom's just old-fashioned," he'd say. "She'll adjust." When I became pregnant, I thought it might bridge the gap. Instead, it widened into an abyss. Eleanor's interest in my pregnancy was clinical, proprietary. She referred to the baby as the Carter heir, rather than our child. She questioned my doctor's credentials, my birth plan, my decision to take only 4 months of maternity leave. "Babies need their mothers," she said over brunch at her Buckhead estate, the words coated in concern but laced with judgment. "Not nannies, not daycare workers. Mothers." "I'll be his mother whether I'm home all day or not," I replied, one hand resting on my growing belly. Eleanor smiled thinly. "We'll see, won't we?" I didn't know then that "we'll see" was a threat, not an observation. I didn't know that while I was designing a nursery, Eleanor was designing my removal. The first concrete sign came in my 7th month, when I found paperwork in Nathan's home office. Legal documents from Harrington and Rowan, the Carter family's law firm. The heading read Temporary Guardianship Provisions. My hands trembled as I read clauses about maternal fitness and contingency custody arrangements. They were preparing for me to fail, or creating conditions to ensure I would. When I confronted Nathan, his face flushed with guilt. "It's just a precaution, Liv. Mom's worried about postpartum depression, that's all. You know how she gets. Better to humor her." Humor her. "Nathan, these are legal documents questioning my ability to mother our child." He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit I once found endearing. They're just drafts. Nothing's been filed. Mom's generation is big on having everything in writing. I wanted to believe him. Part of me still thought Eleanor's controlling nature was just her way of showing love, misguided but ultimately well-intentioned. Then came the rumors. Subtle at first, concerned glances from other Carter family friends, questions about my health history. At a baby shower hosted by Eleanor, I overheard two women in the powder room. Eleanor says she's worried about Olivia's stability. Apparently there was an incident at work, some kind of breakdown. Well, you know, career women. They push themselves too hard, then wonder why they can't handle motherhood. There had been no incident, no breakdown. But the seed was planted, the narrative established. Eleanor was building a case against me before my baby even arrived. 2 weeks before my due date, Nathan came home with more papers. "Just sign these," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. It's standard Carter family protocol, establishing guardianship chains in case of emergency. I read every line this time. The document granted Eleanor temporary custody if I was incapacitated or deemed unfit, during or after delivery. The definition of unfit was deliberately vague. "I'm not signing this," I said. Nathan's face hardened, a rare glimpse of the Carter stubbornness. "Mom's just trying to protect the baby. Why are you fighting this?" "Because these aren't normal precautions, Nathan. This is your mother trying to take our child if I don't mother exactly as she dictates." He left the papers on the counter. "Think about it, Liv. It's just insurance we'll never need." I didn't sign. But I underestimated Eleanor's determination. The night I went into labor, Nathan was in Savannah for a client meeting. I called him first, then my sister who lived across town. The contractions were still far apart. I had time. What I didn't expect was Eleanor arriving at our house before anyone else, an overnight bag already packed. "Nathan called me," she explained, her voice efficient. "I'll drive you." At the hospital, everything happened quickly. The contractions intensified. The doctor mentioned concerns about the baby's heart rate. Words like distress and emergency measures floated above me as I was wheeled into delivery. I remember the anesthesiologist, the cold ceiling tiles, Eleanor's voice somewhere nearby. "I'm his grandmother. I'll be right here." When I woke hours later, groggy and disoriented, my first thought was for my baby. "Where is he?" I asked the nurse. "Your mother-in-law has him in the nursery," she replied. "She said you needed rest." I tried to sit up. "I want to see my son." The nurse looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Carter Sr. mentioned you might be emotional. She's handling the paperwork now." Panic cut through the medication fog. "What paperwork?" By the time I managed to get to the nursery, Eleanor was holding my son, a hospital administrator beside her with a clipboard. Nathan stood nearby, looking torn. "What's happening?" I demanded, my voice weak but determined. Eleanor turned, her face a mask of practiced concern. "Olivia, you should be resting. The doctor said you were quite unstable during delivery. We've arranged for temporary care until you're stronger." "Temporary care? He's my son." The administrator looked between us nervously. "Mrs. Carter, your mother-in-law explained about your condition. The temporary guardianship papers are in order." "What papers?" "I never signed anything." Eleanor's smile was almost pitying. "Nathan has medical power of attorney for you, dear. And he agrees this is best for everyone." I looked at my husband, silently pleading. He couldn't meet my eyes. "It's just for a few days, Liv," he said quietly. "Until you're yourself again." They took my baby to Eleanor's house that night. I was discharged the next morning with empty arms and a prescription for rest and recovery. Nathan stayed with me, hovering awkwardly, caught between his mother's manipulation and his wife's devastation. "You can visit any time," he promised. "Mom just wants to help." But when I tried to visit that afternoon, Eleanor claimed the baby was sleeping. When I returned in the evening, she said he was fussy and needed routine. Each day brought a new excuse, a new reason why I could hold my son but not take him home. A week passed, then another. Nathan shuttled between our house and his mother's, bringing me photos instead of my child. "He's doing great," he'd say. "Mom's got everything under control." The betrayal crystallized not in dramatic confrontations, but in small, cutting moments. Eleanor referring to herself as Mama Eleanor in texts about the baby. Nathan asking if I was feeling more stable yet. The bassinet in our bedroom empty and accusing. I realized then that this wasn't temporary. This was the beginning of my erasure. Everyone thought I broke. For 2 weeks, I barely left our bedroom. I declined visitors, spoke in monosyllables, and cried until my eyes were permanently swollen. Nathan reported my condition to Eleanor daily. His voice hushed as if discussing a terminal illness. "She's not getting better, Mom. Maybe we should bring the baby home." And expose him to this instability. "Nathan, be reasonable. Olivia clearly needs professional help. The baby needs consistency." They thought I was shattered beyond repair. They didn't realize I was listening, planning, transforming. On the 15th day, I showered, dressed, and walked into the kitchen where Nathan was making coffee. He startled as if seeing a ghost. "Liv, you're up. How are you feeling?" "Better," I said simply. "I'd like to see my son today." The relief on his face was palpable. He thought I'd accepted their arrangement. "Of course. I'll call Mom." Eleanor was gracious in what she perceived as victory. She welcomed me into her immaculate home, led me to the nursery she'd prepared. A blue and silver shrine to Carter tradition, complete with the family crest painted above the crib. My son was beautiful, perfect. When I held him, something fierce and primal surged through me. Not just love but determination. This child would know his mother. Not as a visitor, not as an accessory, but as the woman who would move heaven and earth to protect him. "He looks like Nathan, don't you think?" Eleanor said, hovering nearby. "The Carter chin." "He has my eyes," I replied, not looking up from his face. "Well, those might change. Carter men typically have blue eyes by 6 months." I smiled for the first time in weeks. Not because I was happy but because I'd made a decision. Eleanor Carter had declared war on the wrong mother. That afternoon I called Dr. Miles Rowan, senior partner at Harrington and Rowan, and my father-in-law's oldest friend. I'd met him several times at Carter family events, where he'd shown me kindness without Eleanor's performative quality. "Mrs. Carter," he greeted me, his voice warm but formal. "How can I help you?" "I need to understand exactly what was signed regarding my son's custody," I said. "And I need to know my options." There was a long pause. "Perhaps you should come to my office." Dr. Rowan was in his 70s, with silver hair and the kind of lined face that suggested he smiled more than he frowned. His office was old-school leather-bound books, a heavy wooden desk, framed photos of his own grandchildren. "I was sorry to hear about the arrangement," he said once we were seated. "Not standard procedure, despite what Eleanor might have suggested." "What exactly did Nathan sign?" He pulled a file from his drawer. "A temporary guardianship transfer. It grants Eleanor physical custody for 30 days, with an option to petition for extension based on certain conditions." "My mental fitness," I supplied. He nodded grimly. "Eleanor has been documenting concerns." "Fabricating concerns," I corrected. "Perhaps." He studied me carefully. "May I speak frankly, Mrs. Carter?" "Please." "Eleanor Carter has been a client of this firm for 30 years. She's used to getting her way, especially regarding family matters. When her husband died, she transferred that control to Nathan. She sees this child as the continuation of the Carter legacy, her legacy, and me as an obstacle, as an unknown variable," he said diplomatically. "But there's something Eleanor doesn't understand about these documents." He pointed to a clause on the 3rd page. This temporary transfer was executed without proper notarization. It's technically valid for emergency medical situations, but for extended custody, legally questionable. Hope flickered for the first time in weeks. So I can challenge it. You could. He leaned back in his chair. But Eleanor would fight. It would be messy, public, and hard on everyone, including your son. My heart sank. Then what do I do? Dr. Rowan's eyes held a glint I hadn't noticed before. There might be another approach. One that uses Eleanor's own tactics against her. That day, I began building my case. Quietly, methodically, with Dr. Rowan's guidance. I underwent a full psychological evaluation with an independent psychiatrist, who documented my mental stability and natural maternal bonding. I gathered character references from colleagues and friends outside the Carter circle. I documented every visit Eleanor denied or restricted, every comment that undermined my role as mother. Most importantly, I started recording our interactions, Georgia being a one-party consent state. Eleanor, confident in her victory, grew less careful with her words. Nathan needs to understand that a child's early years determine everything, she told me during one visit, adjusting my son's blanket after taking him from my arms. The Carter name comes with responsibilities. Not everyone is equipped to instill those values. And you think I'm not equipped? I asked, my phone recording in my pocket. She smiled thinly. Let's just say I've seen how you manage stress, Olivia. A baby isn't a marketing campaign you can delegate when it gets difficult. Like evidence of intent. Meanwhile, I played the role Eleanor expected, the gradually recovering mother, grateful for her help, increasingly compliant. I accepted her parenting tips, with apparent humility. I deferred to her schedule for visits. I even asked her advice on becoming more stable. Nathan, caught between us, seemed relieved by my new attitude. See, Mom's helping. She just wants what's best for everyone. I smiled and said nothing, because the best thing for my son was coming, and neither Nathan nor Eleanor would see it until too late. The plan unfolded in careful stages, orchestrated by Dr. Rowan with a precision that suggested he'd been waiting years to outmaneuver Eleanor Carter. First, we documented the procedural flaws in the original guardianship transfer. Without proper notarization and witness signatures, the document had legal vulnerabilities, especially since I had been under post-delivery medication when Nathan supposedly consulted me. Eleanor rushed this through, Dr. Rowan explained. She was so focused on getting physical custody that she cut corners legally. Next, we prepared a counterfiling. Not a direct custody challenge, but something more subtle. Dr. Rowan called it reinforcement adoption. It's an unusual procedure, he explained, typically used in blended families to reinforce parental rights. But in this case, we can use it to essentially adopt your own child back into your custody. The genius of the approach was its indirectness. Instead of fighting Eleanor head-on, we would create a legal path that circumvented her entirely. The trap was set when Dr. Rowan contacted Eleanor with concerns about the original paperwork. There are some irregularities that could invite scrutiny, he told her during a meeting I wasn't supposed to know about. If challenged, these documents might trigger a state investigation into how they were obtained. Eleanor, whose social standing was paramount, immediately worried about scandal. What do you suggest? A simple solution. Sign these updated forms that clarify the temporary nature of the arrangement. It protects everyone's interests while avoiding any unpleasantness. The documents Eleanor signed included standard guardianship language on the first page. But on page 3, paragraph 4, the section Eleanor typically skimmed, was a consent clause for adoption proceedings initiated by the birth mother. In essence, Eleanor signed away her custodial claim while believing she was reinforcing it. The final piece came when Nathan, worn down by weeks of divided loyalty, signed similar clarification documents without consulting his mother. I just want peace, he told me. I want our family back together. I didn't tell him that our definition of family had fundamentally changed. 3 months after my son's birth, the adoption was quietly processed through family court. I legally adopted my own child, with Eleanor's unwitting consent serving as the relinquishment of her temporary guardianship. Dr. Rowan delivered the final papers himself, arriving at our house on a Sunday afternoon when Nathan was visiting his mother. "It's done," he said, handing me a sealed envelope. "Your son is legally yours, solely yours, with no secondary guardianship provisions." I held the papers against my chest, tears blurring my vision. "Why did you help me? Eleanor's been your client for decades." He looked out the window, his expression distant. 30 years ago, Eleanor did something similar to Nathan's nanny, a young woman who loved that boy like her own. Eleanor decided she was too attached and removed her from Nathan's life overnight. No goodbye, no explanation. I watched what it did to both of them. He turned back to me. "Some patterns need to be broken." That night I packed a bag for myself and my son. I left Nathan a letter explaining that I was taking our baby to my sister's house until we could discuss our future, if we had one. "I've legally adopted our son," I wrote. "Not to take him from you, but to protect him from becoming a pawn in your mother's game. You need to decide, Nathan. Are you a husband and father first, or a Carter son?" I was buckling the baby into his car seat when Nathan called, his voice frantic. "Mom just collapsed. They think it's her heart. We're at Piedmont Hospital." The hospital corridors were aggressively bright, antiseptic light bouncing off white walls and polished floors. I found Nathan in the cardiac wing waiting area, his face pale with worry. "How is she?" I asked, our son sleeping against my shoulder. "Stable. Minor heart attack. They're running tests." His eyes fixed on the baby. "You brought him." "Of course. He should be here." Nathan's expression softened with gratitude. He thought I was being compassionate. He didn't know I was being strategic. Eleanor was awake when we entered her room, looking smaller against the white hospital sheets, and 4 in her arm and monitors beeping steadily beside her. Her eyes immediately went to the baby. "You brought him," she whispered, reaching out weakly. I didn't move closer. "Yes." A nurse entered behind us, checking Eleanor's vitals. "Family visits are good for recovery," she said cheerfully. "Especially grandchildren." Eleanor smiled thinly. "He's more than my grandchild. I've been caring for him since birth." The nurse glanced at me, confused. "Oh, I thought you were the mother." "I am," I said clearly. "Mrs. Carter has been helping while I recovered from delivery." Eleanor's monitor beeped faster. "Nathan, take the baby. I want to hold him." Nathan reached for our son, but I stepped back. "Actually, the doctor mentioned limiting contact because of infection risks. We can visit, but holding should wait until you're stronger." It was a lie, but a believable one. Eleanor's face tightened with frustration. "Nonsense. I've been his primary caregiver for months. A little hospital visit won't hurt him." The nurse looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I'll let you folks sort this out," she said, backing toward the door. "Just press the call button if you need anything." As she left, I heard her whisper to another nurse in the hallway. "Family drama in 412. The grandmother thinks she's the mother." The second nurse replied, just loud enough for me to hear. "She doesn't know who signed the adoption papers, does she?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "What adoption papers?" The moment hung between us, crystal and sharp. Nathan looked confused. Eleanor looked suspicious. And I, for the first time in months, felt completely in control. "Nathan," I said quietly, "could you give your mother and me a moment alone?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll get coffee." When the door closed behind him, I sat in the visitor's chair, my son still sleeping peacefully against me. Eleanor watched us with the wary expression of someone sensing a trap but unable to see it. "What adoption papers, Olivia?" I met her gaze steadily. "The ones you signed 3 weeks ago. The ones that legally established me as my son's sole guardian and terminated all other custody claims, including yours." Her face drained of color. "That's impossible." I never signed. Page 3, paragraph 4 of the clarification documents Dr. Rowan prepared. The ones you signed to avoid potential scrutiny of the original guardianship transfer. Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by disbelief, then fury. You tricked me. No, Eleanor. I protected my child from you, the same way you claimed to be protecting him from me. Her hand trembled as she reached for the call button. Get out. I want you out of my room. When Nathan returns. Nathan signed the same papers, I interrupted. He agreed that our son belongs with his mother. The only question now is whether that mother will allow a relationship with his grandmother. The threat hung in the air between us. Eleanor's face contorted with the effort of controlling her rage. You wouldn't dare keep him from me. I'm his blood. Blood doesn't entitle you to control, Eleanor. Love doesn't manipulate. Family doesn't steal. Her monitor beeped erratically as her pulse quickened. I never stole anything. I was protecting the Carter legacy. No. You were stealing my child because you couldn't control his mother. I stood, adjusting my sleeping son against my shoulder. Now you have a choice. You can fight me and never see him again, or you can accept that I am his mother, not his temporary caretaker, not an obstacle to your plans, but his mother. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, whether from emotion or calculation, I couldn't tell. Please, she whispered. Don't take him away. He's all I have left of. Your control. I finished for her. Your legacy. That's the problem, Eleanor. He was never a person to you. He was a possession. I moved toward the door, then paused. When you're released, we can discuss visitation. Supervised, initially. If that goes well, we'll reassess. You can't do this, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I already have. I turned back one last time. Oh, and Eleanor. His name is James Reeves Carter. Reeves after my family, not just Carter after yours. You might want to practice saying it correctly. In the hallway, the nurse who had whispered about the adoption papers gave me a small nod of approval. Nathan stood nearby, 2 coffee cups in his hands. His expression a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Liv, what's happening? Mom's monitor was going crazy. We're leaving, I said simply. Your mother needs rest, and our son needs his home. His real home. But Mom said. Nathan, I interrupted gently. You need to decide right now. Are you coming with us or staying with her? He looked at the closed door to Eleanor's room, then at his son's sleeping face. Something shifted in his expression, a weight lifting, a clarity emerging. Let me get the car, he said. Eleanor was discharged 3 days later. Nathan helped her settle back into her Buckhead house, but he came home each night to us. Our conversations were careful at first, then increasingly honest as he began to recognize the manipulation he'd enabled. I thought I was protecting everyone, he admitted one night as we watched our son sleep in his proper nursery. Instead, I almost lost you both. You did lose me, I corrected gently. The woman you married wouldn't have fought this way. Couldn't have. He nodded slowly. I know. And I think I like the new version better. Eleanor's first supervised visit came 2 weeks after her discharge. She arrived with gifts, her smile tight but determined. She called the baby James, not little Carter as she had before. She asked before holding him, her eyes seeking my permission rather than assuming her right. It was progress, however forced. Over the following months, a new pattern emerged. Eleanor learned that access to her grandson came with boundaries. Nathan learned that standing between 2 strong women meant sometimes standing firm, not just keeping peace. And I learned that revenge doesn't always require destruction. Sometimes it simply requires redrawing the boundaries that others have violated. Dr. Rowan retired that year, but not before ensuring all the adoption paperwork was permanently filed and unassailable. Eleanor will test you again, he warned me during our final meeting. It's her nature. But now you have the legal foundation to withstand it. He was right. There were moments, subtle attempts to undermine my parenting, suggestions that perhaps James would be better off with more Carter influence. But each time, I simply reminded her of our agreement, and of what she stood to lose. By James's first birthday, an uneasy truce had settled over our family. Eleanor hosted the party at her home. Her idea, her attempt to show the world that all was well with the Carter family image. I allowed it, but brought the cake myself, made the guest list, and stood firmly beside Nathan as we welcomed each guest. When Eleanor introduced me, she said, "This is Olivia, James's mother," without qualification or hesitation. It wasn't warmth, but it was acknowledgement. For now that was enough. Later that evening, as guests mingled on the manicured lawn, Eleanor approached me where I stood watching James toddle between admirers. "You've won, you know," she said quietly. "Nathan chooses you now. The baby is legally yours." I turned to face her. "It was never about winning, Eleanor. It was about being recognized. Not as your competition or your subordinate, but as your equal, at least where my son is concerned." She studied me with new eyes. Not warm but respectful. "You would have made a formidable Carter matriarch." "I'm not interested in being a matriarch," I replied. "Just a mother, wife, myself." Eleanor nodded once, then walked away to greet new arrivals. We would never be close. We would never fully trust each other. But we had found a balance, not through her control or my surrender, but through my quiet, determined stand. That night, driving home with James asleep in his car seat and Nathan beside me, I felt a sense of completion. Not because I had destroyed Eleanor Carter, but because I had refused to let her destroy me. Some call it revenge. I call it restoration. Hello, my relentless hearts. If this story stirred something in you, that quiet fire that burns when someone tries to erase who you are, you're exactly where you belong. Here on Boundless Revenge, we tell stories not of cruelty, but of boundaries reclaimed. Stories where pain isn't the ending, it's the catalyst. If you've ever been undermined, if you've ever smiled through your own erasure just to rise later on your terms, this space is for you. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what lines would you never allow someone to cross? Like, share and subscribe to this channel. Because here justice doesn't shout, stands firm. And when it moves, it's boundless.